Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Veterans Breakfast Club. I'm Todd DiPastino. We have a saying here at the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we've had this saying, a motto, that's what I should say. We have a motto, every veteran has a story. And our guest tonight, Bethany Redmond, Army intelligence veteran, definitely has a story. Hello, Bethany, how are you?
Hi, everybody. I'm great. Thank you so much.
It just so happens that Bethany is a woman, and it just so happens that this is Women's History Month. And so when we're talking to Beth tonight, I think we'll also be kind of acknowledging, commemorating, honoring Women's History Month. And Bethany's service, we were just talking before we went live, is kind of history. I mean, it was kind of a
Yes,
long time ago, right, Bethany?
not quite ancient history, but
No,
maybe one day I'll be in the history books when they're teaching US history to the kids in school.
exactly, exactly. And speaking of women's history, we also have what do we say, Beth Russell? Do we say wingman, wing woman, wing person? Wing woman doesn't sound right.
Co-host.
Co- Do you know how about live stream engineer? Our live stream
Oh,
Oh,
engineer,
I
Beth
don't think I'm an
Russell.
engineer, but we'll go with
All
it.
right. Thank you very much, Beth, for uh, for being part of this effort here tonight.
Absolutely.
Again, this is the Veterans Breakfast Club. If you haven't joined us before, you know what you may not know what we do, which is we gather veterans together with members of the public and have them share stories. And we're looking for all kinds of military experiences, no matter what you did, no matter how you served, no matter when you served, no matter what branch of service. Certainly doesn't have to be combat. We're interested in the whole kind of the whole spectrum of experience, which is really, really broad. And I'm not a veteran. Beth isn't a veteran. And so we kind of make our livings by asking a lot of questions in order to gain some of the perspectives and experience and wisdom that veterans have to share. So, Bethany, you joined the Army, did you say in 1996?
yes. Well, so technically, I joined in 1995, and that is a story that'll be a part of the story because believe it or not, my parents had to sign a permission slip for me to enlist in the Army because I was underage. I was only 17 when I enlisted in the delayed entry program.
What
So,
in the
not
world? What in the world would inspire you to join the Army?
Oh, with promises of attending the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. And my recruiters, they did good by me and they were good to their word. And yeah, I was a high school senior and about to take my kid brother out trick-or-treating. So it was a dark and stormy night in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And the phone rang. And, again, not quite ancient history, but my phone was still attached to the wall at my parents' home. I didn't, have the cell phone. And so my mom said, the phone call is for you. And I was feeling rushed because we were trying to leave. And it was a young man named Sergeant Kamala. Now, I have no idea what his first name was. It was Sergeant. And so Sergeant Kamala from the island of Kauai had found his way to northern New Mexico to a recruiting office there in Santa Fe. And he asked me what I was interested in doing. And I said, I'm interested in foreign languages. But in my mind, there were so many questions popping up like, why would a woman join the military? Can a woman even join the military? And even though I was a 17-year-old know it all, I had zero knowledge of who could actually join the military. And so I told him, I want to study foreign languages. I love languages. I was studying French and Spanish at the time. And he said, well, we have the world's best language institute. And again, a little sassy at 17, I just very quickly quipped, well, you have to say that so you can recruit me and lure me in. And, I'm not a sucker and I'm not going to fall for that one. And he said, just ask around and I'll call back in a week or so. So sure enough, the next day I talked to my favorite teacher. Her name was Mrs. Anderson, and she was my French teacher and my Spanish teacher. And I asked her, Mrs. Anderson, have you ever heard of the Defense Language Institute? And she was a very serious linguist. She was fluent in French and Spanish. She was learning Japanese on the side for fun. She was a lifelong learner of languages. And she took her glasses off of her head. And that to me was always the sign that I was going to get a very serious life lesson from Mrs. Anderson. And she took her glasses off and she put her paper down and she pursed her lips and she said, I would give my left arm to go to DLI. And I thought, okay, I need the Sergeant Kamala to call me back right away. And so um, he called back, and we started to meet and talk about what it would require of me to enlist and even get into DLI. I had to pass the ASVAB first. I have to say the recruiters were very intimidating in the recruiting office because I would say I was an atypical recruit for that particular office. A lot of younger men, maybe 18 to 22, who they weren't quite sure what they're going to do, and maybe they couldn't go to college. But I was a straight A student. I was the drum major of the marching band at my high school. I was French club president. And the thought of me putting on a military uniform and attending boot camp was just as foreign as the languages they instruct at DLI. And so we
Bethany, I'm
just
sorry to
continue.
interrupt you.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just want you would strike me. Okay, you just gave us a little bit of a profile of you at 17.
Yes.
And I will just use the word, it's a four-letter word, kind of nerd.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good,
And
good.
in fact, that plays into the story. I'm a
Yes.
word nerd, which is why I love languages. I love foreign languages. And my family, my dad is a minister, and he's trained in ancient biblical Greek and Hebrew. And he used to study his Hebrew and Greek with me when I was a toddler, because I was at that perfect parroting stage where I would just repeat anything that was being spoken to me. Now, I don't know those languages, but I helped him pass a lot of those tests. And I think it really built those neural pathways. And my mom is an English literature major and an author. And so we're always talking about words and, what is the etymology of that word? And so, yes, I am a nerd. And more specifically, I'm a word nerd.
You're a word nerd. Well, that
I'm a word nerd.
I can relate. But what I was going to say was, like, if I were to look at your profile, I would think, oh, she's going to college right away. She's not
Yes.
gonna mess with the army or anything like that. Why did you do your detour into the army and not go to college?
That is a good question. And I'm really thankful that even though it was a struggle for me at the time, it's enabled me to talk to young teenagers now who might not think that they know what they can do with their lives. And, it might not be appropriate for them to go to college right away, but it doesn't mean it's the end of the world for them. And so, really, it was more about me just struggling with the college application process. And so, in 1995, it was very different than how it was in the 70s when my parents were applying for college. And so, I think I was too afraid to ask for help from the guidance counselors. And I was just hoping and wishing that something would work out. And so, the timing of that phone call was really, I would say, more than serendipitous. I think it was providence, and it really put me on the path that I was supposed to be on. Now, later, after I exited active duty, I did go to university and I used the GI Bill, which big fan of the GI Bill. I didn't have to pay for my undergraduate degree, and I studied political science at the University of New Mexico. But I was a scared 17-year-old who on one hand thought she knew it all, but really I knew very little about the real world. So it
How
was great
interesting.
that Sergeant Kamala called.
What did your minister father and English literature major mother have to say about you going into the army?
I always joke that we should have this conversation with them because it's fun to hear the different versions. And I can see Tammy laughing. She knows a little bit more about my story and my family. They were shocked, and not because they were opposed to me being in the military. In fact, my father had been an Army chaplain with the Illinois National Guard
Oh,
when I was a
wow.
little girl.
Huh.
And we joke that he served time at Leavenworth, but he was one of the head chaplains at Leavenworth for a summer. And he'd go away and come back with the freeze dried meal kits, the MREs for my brother and I to have. And then my mom actually grew up on the island of Okinawa on military bases because her father was a civilian working for the military there. And he was a Navy veteran and had fought there on Okinawa. He was with the Navy, he was a CB, and during that time it didn't matter what your MOS was, you were fighting, you were called to pick up your weapon and fight and defend your life and those of the men around you. And for some reason he chose to go back to that island and help the military maintain their presence there and set up a better standard of living for the people living in that area. And, it's Okinawa was a pretty serious, national security asset at that time. So serving in the military wasn't the issue for my parents. They thought that I was making an irrational decision because, like you said, I was a nerd. I should have been college bound. Was this my form of rebellion? My dad wanted me to do a cost benefit analysis comparing, should I go to the army or should I go to college first? And fortunately, I prevailed in persuading my parents. I hope I did it graciously. If not, I know they're very proud of me, because you do have a picture I think you're going to share later. But my parents were so proud of my military service and becoming a linguist. But it really was a shock. Yep, there I am. That is my father, Bill Redmond, and my younger brother, who looks nothing like that anymore because he's about 6'1" and has a big beard. That's Jordan. And then my mom, Shirley Ray, next to my brother. And so they came to DLI in March of '98 to celebrate my graduation from the Language Institute. So very, very proud, but they were just shocked and a little confused because, again, I didn't fit the profile of the typical enlistee at the time. But you know what? It worked out.
It sure did work out, and they must be so proud, not
Yes.
only that you served in the army, but that you forged your own path in life.
Yes.
You weren't following the path that you assumed, or I would have assumed would be laid out for you. It's something that you chose. Did you ever consider when you were at basic training that maybe you made a mistake?
Not at all. In
Not at
fact,
all. Okay.
so another funny story that my father loves to remind me of. So, again, preacher's daughter, grew up going to church camp every summer, a little wilderness expedition, staying in cabins. And usually with most camping adventures, the food's not that great and you shower with cold water. And
Mhm.
so I think one Sunday afternoon, when I was allowed my one telephone call out to the world, I called my parents and I was having the time of my life. I was also very healthy. I had been athletic all growing up. And so, the physical exertion wasn't so challenging. It was getting along with different people that was
Yep.
a little bit more of a
Yep.
stretch. But I thought it was great. And so I told them one day, I said, "This is amazing. I love boot camp. It's like church camp." And again, I just shocked and appalled my poor parents. And they immediately, got on the phone with the elders of the church and, what is happening at church camp? Or has the army gotten too soft? And so church camp was always good. I didn't think the army was too soft, but I enjoyed it. Made me feel like I was a part of something bigger, right? Because in boot camp, we're all given our equipment, but it doesn't belong to us. Another soldier in training was wearing it, for years probably, and I was handed an M16 that, dozens of other soldiers in training had carried. I was learning from the best drill sergeants, meeting interesting people. And so it just made me feel like a part of something. And I remember the day that we learned how to throw grenades. Now, mind you, I went to Fort Jackson. I was in boot camp at Fort Jackson. It was not for infantry training. We didn't go to, it wasn't Fort Leonard Wood or anything, or Fort Bragg. And so we were a bunch of trainees who would be sent to work some kind of office job or go to DLI. And so we were all kind of nerds to some degree. Nobody was really preparing to be a full-time infantryman. But again, all soldiers, we have to learn these basic skills. But I remember being in the bunker and our drill sergeants are handing us our grenades and, they slap them into your chest and you hold on to them. And I had this big, silly grin on my face. And my drill sergeants sometimes called me Annie because of my red hair, or Red. And they thought it was really funny that I have red hair and my last name is Redmond, because drill sergeants have the worst sense of humor ever. So they just always teased me for that. But I was standing there just smiling. And one of my drill sergeants stopped. "Why are you smiling, Redmond?" It's like, "I'm just so excited, drill sergeant." I could not wait to get out there and pop that pin and the spoon and chuck that grenade. And so I thought it was adventurous. It was a lot of fun. So not once did I question, why am I doing this? I was just ready for the next adventure.
This is so great. Tammy Kim, I want to thank you very much for referring Bethany to us. This is just so already out the gate, really fascinating and interesting. Now, you grew up in Los Alamos, New Mexico, the
Yes.
birthplace of the atomic bomb. Um,
Yes.
Why? What brought your family to Los Alamos?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually born in Illinois, Lincoln, Illinois. It was actually named by Abraham Lincoln when he was on the presidential campaign trail, and he christened the city himself. The legend goes off the back of a train with a watermelon. I don't know how true that is, but we lived in Illinois until I was, maybe 10 years old. And my dad is very passionate about science and philosophy and having interesting conversations with people about spirituality and the deeper meaning of life. And so he thought, what better place to engage the big brains of the world in these tough conversations about life and the meaning of life than going to this place with a national laboratory, right? And so Los Alamos, I think, has this record for most PhDs per capita, just brilliant, brilliant people from all over the globe. When I worked in different jobs there at the lab a few years ago, it was always amazing to me how many international scientists and researchers, and we would count all of the different countries, and it was just staggering. And so, yeah, birthplace of the atomic bomb, which really kind of fed into my own personal lore that has been developing over time. And yeah, it was very exciting to be in New Mexico. I think it was a good change of pace coming out of Illinois. And yeah, a lot of interesting things happening there. So many different cultures with the, Spanish influences and Native Americans. But of course, at 17, all I could think about, when I was looking at colleges, my one criteria was it needs to be east of the Mississippi because I want to get out of the Rocky Mountain corridor. I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
So it worked out. I got to go to Fort Jackson,
Yeah, I
South
was going to say you
Carolina.
got to go to Fort Jackson. And then after Fort Jackson, and sadly you had to graduate and leave basic training, where
Yeah.
did you go?
So immediately to the Defense Language Institute. And I don't know if that is the current path for linguists who are training, who are first time enlistees. And so usually, and many of you on the call already know this, but you attend basic training and then you go to your AIT, your advanced training.
Right.
And so we didn't actually go to our AIT, which was classified training. We had to have classified training. We couldn't do that until we were trained up in our foreign language because we needed to be able to perform our job, but in the native language, or not native, but in the language that we would be training in. So after basic training, there were about 24 of us from the same company there in my unit. And we all boarded a plane and flew into San Francisco. And God bless the bus driver and the man who was accompanying him. They said, why don't we take the scenic route? And this was October. And it must have been, I don't remember what time of day it was, but they probably, in fact, how things happen now, I actually live right up the road from Monterey, California. I currently reside in Half Moon Bay, and there's a highway from San Francisco International Airport into the coast called Highway 92. And I'm pretty sure that bus driver took that road and then took Pacific Highway 1 South. And so again, oh, so sad we graduated from basic training in South Carolina. So when we hit the coast and the sun is setting on the Pacific Ocean, I think we all believed we died and gone to heaven. It's like, this is the reward we get for surviving boot camp and graduating and doing a really good job. And so, yeah, arrived at DLI very, very late at night, and it was pitch black. So I had no idea what it looked like. My only reference for DLI was my mom had me watch Private Benjamin before I went to basic training. And in their boot camp scene, Goldie Hawn is joking with her girlfriends and they're graduating, and I'm going to the place with the yachts. Well, that's where I went. I went to the place with the yachts. So in my mind, I'm thinking yachts. And it was true. I could see Fisherman's Wharf from my barracks window. It was absolutely incredible.
Wow, Monterey, California. And I do want to
Yes.
ask anybody else on the call, please put in the chat if you were at the DLI, the Defense Language Institute in Monterey. I hear it's absolutely wonderful. And I also
Yeah.
have heard, of course, that it's unbelievably rigorous in terms of the
Yes.
education you get.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. In fact, on another fateful Sunday afternoon telephone call to my parents, and so for a fact, I've held a security clearance for more years than I have not held a security clearance. And so My first clearance was bequeathed, not bequeathed, but I don't want to say just gifted to me. It wasn't a gift, but I received my first security clearance, shortly after my 18th birthday. And at the time, it was the FBI who would perform the background checks for, Army intelligence linguists. And so I called my parents one day and my mom was very worried. And she said, I'm really worried about how you're going to do at DLI. She says, I know you're a very good student, but we just got off the phone with your FBI special agent who's performing your background check. And he said the dropout rate and the depression and the suicide rates are very, very high because the program is so rigorous. And of course, fortunately, my stubbornness and sassiness at 17 served me well, and I was up for the challenge. It was very difficult, especially the moment I realized I would be learning modern standard Arabic. Because we had no idea what language would be assigned to us upon receiving our seat at the Defense Language Institute. And so it was based off of our aptitude tests from the D Lab. And the higher you scored, the more difficult language you were assigned. And Arabic and Mandarin and Korean are right up there with they're the hardest languages taught at DLI. And so I would look at the Arabic script and just think, how in the world am I going to learn this?
Yeah.
I mean, they write it right to left. My
Yeah.
brain can't think that way. But sure enough, I mean, it is rigorous, but they have really done an excellent job of designing the program to teach adults, right? Like, we're not small children learning to speak a language for the first time. Most of, some people, their brains are pretty set in their ways, right? But to teach them a new language and to be proficient and use it for things that are really, really important, more than just ordering coffee at the, local coffee shop. It was very, very interesting. And, I often encourage people who are studying Spanish or French or, German at high school. I just keep telling, it's like, just practice it, just get into it every day, open your mouth in class, speak it. The more mistakes you make verbally, you're going to pick it up. It was none of this, we're going to sit and learn the alphabet, ad nauseum and conjugate the verb to be over and over again and all the different tense forms. It was very short form conversations, just like teaching a small child how to speak. And so I could have a very basic conversation like a 2-year-old could carry on before I even knew the alphabet. And so it was really amazing. By the time I graduated, I was sometimes dreaming in Arabic, and I would have there were some days my brain was so scrambled from reading so much Arabic, I would pick up a book and I couldn't read English. Like, my brain was just exhausted. It was rigorous, but it was worth every minute. And it was the best thing I could have done to want to become a linguist, because they just don't teach languages like that at the university.
And what was the dropout rate?
So for my class, the way it was, we had 2 teams of 30 people. So our graduating class started out with 60, and those 30 people in a team were divided in 3 classrooms of 10. The 10 students I started out with, we lost half of them by the time we graduated.
Wow.
So some of them failed out completely. And, of course, the terrible joke was like, if you can't pass this, you're going to truck driving school. And it's like, well, I think that's a bit of a leap. They've already paid for your security clearance and background check. You'll be put in another military intelligence role. But it was very, very hard. And that aptitude test, while it does a very good job of assessing one's aptitude test, it was not a guarantee that you could succeed. And so my observation had been a lot of students who went in with high scores and were very boastful about how highly they scored on the aptitude test. They relied on that instead of putting in, that, like, the mental sweat equity of just studying every single night and, practicing every day and going to the library and, not being afraid to ask questions in class and just trying it out and sounding like a complete fool in front of your mates and your teachers, but it was the best way to learn.
And that was how long, how many weeks?
Oh, not
12?
enough. I wish it was we no, we
6
were there for
months?
18 months.
18 months. 18 months.
Yes,
Okay.
18 months.
So at the end of 18 months, you've been through the intellectual ringer and you come out pretty darn proficient in
Yes.
Arabic.
Yes. And so at the end of those blessed 18 months, um, for those of us who are able to complete the course without, there was an option for students who showed promise. They called it, rolling them back. It's like, you've made it this far, you struggled through this module, we're going to put you in a class behind. And so they got to stay there longer, kind of felt like a scam. It's like, oh, I should have flunked that test and I could be here another few months in Monterey. But for those of us who weren't rolled back, it was 18 months. Our graduation examination culminated. It was a whole week of examinations, and they call it the DLPT. I think it's the Defense Language Proficiency Test, and it is brutal. And and this is fun now that I'm I get paid to protect company intellectual property. There's got to be great intellectual property behind this test, but they keep that test under lock and key. There are about 4 or 5 different versions of it. So there would be 40 of us all in a room, and my test is different than the soldier's test next to mine or the airman's test next to mine. And that was another fun thing too. DLI serves all of the armed forces. So it's not just for the Army, but we had Navy seamen and airmen and Marines. One of my class leaders was a Navy SEAL. We had a couple Special Forces men in our classes with us. And so all of us had different versions of the test. There was reading, speaking, and listening. The reading and listening portions of the exams were at least 2 hours long. I mean, it was brutal. And by the time you walk out of there, again, I felt like I was dribbling all over myself because my brain was completely gone. But the speaking test was very, very difficult. And we had to be tested by instructors who are not our instructors because they didn't want any kind of personal bias inform our final test score. And so, we formed a bond with these instructors. We loved these instructors. They would take us on picnics every semester to learn how to make Middle Eastern food and taught us how to make baklava. And so we had a relationship with these people, but they didn't want their, personal opinions, good or bad, of their students to affect what our final test score was. And I remember sitting in the test. I've never seen these men and women before, and I'm so nervous. I'm sweating through my uniform, and we had to wear our class A's because this is a serious deal, right? I mean, we're there to like show them the might of the U.S. military, and we're strong and we're smart. And the one thing I couldn't finish in the conversation, they asked me all sorts of things, right? And like things in the political news, things about history, and I was doing fine until they gave me a scenario. You're in DC and you're traveling on the metro and somebody bumps you and you spill your coffee on your uniform. What do you do? And I couldn't remember the word for dry cleaner. I mean, it's like, when am I ever going to use the word dry cleaner? I'm a military intelligence linguist. And so that was a little bit disappointing, but I performed very well. The requirement to graduate, the scale is, I think, a 0 to 5 scale. 5 is virtually impossible for anybody to attain. You have to be perfectly fluent in the language and all subject matters. And so I don't think that person exists on planet Earth. But I scored a 2 plus 2. So I was really good with my reading, excellent, like verbal, or I'm sorry, eye recognition. I
Right.
remember things very fast visually. And so after that, again, we've not attended AIT yet. So we
Can I
had to
interrupt you,
leave.
Bethany?
Yes, yeah.
Because Colonel Washabaugh, great idea. Brad Washabaugh here in the Zoom room says we ought to give you a pop quiz. Could you
Oh,
could you please say in Arabic, every veteran has a story?
how, ooh.
You're mean, Brad
No,
Washabaugh.
actually, I can't. Let's see. I would have to find my dictionary. So, so
Could you
for
say something
reference,
else then?
yeah. Well, how about this? أهلا وسهلا. اسمي Bethany Redmond. كنت جندي في الجيش الأمريكي ودرست العربية في DLI.
What did she say, Brad?
She said her name, and she's something at DLI, and she's just so pleased to be the esteemed company of Todd D. Pasquino.
Yeah. Yes, thank you, sir. That's
Yeah.
exactly what I said.
Well, I guess the question I'd have, Bethany, is that do you still use it? Do you still use Arabic? Do you still speak?
I do not. And every year when the calendar rolls over, it's my New Year's resolution to
Right,
maintain it.
right.
It's definitely one of those use it or lose it.
Oh, yeah.
I graduated from high school having taken AP French 5. My French is very, very poor. However, those nooks and crannies in my brain that were very fastidiously carved out at DLI, I believe that if I was put in an intensive program for about 2 or 3 weeks, it would come back.
Come back like that. Renee
Yes.
asks here in
Yeah.
the chat, was it total immersion in Arabic from day one, or was English also spoken in the training modules?
So fortunately, the rumors we heard when we first got there was that it was not total immersion, which I think is merciful considering how difficult it was. So in the early months, there was a lot of English used, especially since not only were they teaching us the language, they were teaching us to be completely proficient in the grammar and syntax as well. And so it would be like telling a 2-year-old, this is a noun and this is an adjective and this is a verb and this is a, dangling modifier, right? And so they would use the English, you know, technical terms for linguistics essentially to help teach us with the words. Then it got to the point where they really did not want us to use English anymore because we could communicate enough. And again, the more you just try and you keep speaking it over and over, it's going to come and you're going to learn new words. So for those of us who had a couple other languages, under our belt, so to speak, we would cheat by throwing in French or Spanish or German words. And so, we'd go along in a sentence and then pause and just throw in a word. I always opted for French because some of our Arabic teachers also knew French based on which country they came from. And, a lot of French and Arabic, overlapping in Northern Africa. And so they would laugh and it's like, okay, yes, that's not English, but it's also not Arabic. And so, but it wasn't total immersion. But by the last semester, the approach was far more aggressive in terms of, we're not going to do the English in class and we want you just speaking it all of the time.
And Brad Washabal, thank you for adding the Arabic here in the chat. Don Nemchek
Yes.
asked, yeah, could you read that? Could you read that, Bethany? Can you read that in the chat?
Let's see. As long as you don't laugh at my pronunciation. Hold on, I've got to scroll. I'm sorry, excuse me. Okay. Lekol Muharib Kadim Kasa.
Sounds right to me. Don Nemchek asks, did you have to read the Quran?
No, in fact, that was interesting. So again, thinking back when I was in the Army, way before, not way before, but before 9/11,
right.
It was 1996. And,
right.
In the 8 weeks I was in basic training, the drill sergeant, we're cut off from the world. We have no idea what's happening in the news. And, our drill sergeants, again, so kind and compassionate, would march up and down. It's like, oh, Saddam Hussein has done this again, right? So basically everybody in the Army at that time had some expectation that we'll have to do something to, respond to what's going on in the Middle East. And so many of the instructors at the Defense Language Institute had come out of Iraq and other countries that had been under the rule of really awful regimes. And their loyalty was with us, right? And so to ensure that we were getting the best linguistic education possible, the discussion of religion and politics was very much guided by, I would say, Uncle Sam. So I still have all of the textbooks that were created and printed. DLI had its own printing press at the time and its own library. And so any of the cultural or religious lessons were approved by, this is approved by US military messaging, right? And so sometimes we would ask questions. That is one thing, sir, I do remember how to ask because I asked a lot of questions. So I'd always raise my hand and say, Ya Ustad, Indi Usel. So, sir, teacher, I have a question. And so we would ask questions And if it kind of broached a very sensitive topic, they would look around, get up and shut the door, and then come in and answer the question. But they were very clear, like, this is my personal opinion. I'm not here representing anybody. But most of our instructors were actually Christian. They had been, oppressed in their own countries. Some of the teachers were Muslim. So we did not have to read the Quran. We learned a lot about Islamic holidays, which I thought was really interesting and exciting. As a military intelligence operative of some sort, you always know when Ramadan is, because it always affects what's happening in the Middle East and how the military overseas is responding. So I have a copy of the Quran, but I have never read it in Arabic or English for that matter.
We're gonna go next to what your posting was or what your assignment was after
Yeah.
you graduated from DLI. But I do want to ask Justin Miller. You have your hand up. Hey, Justin, how are you? Oh, you got to unmute, Justin. Justin, oh, there you go.
Bethany, a couple of questions I have.
Yes, sir.
When you went into the program, were you all were in as newbies? There was no one in there that was coming back from another language to learn Arabic.
So that is a great question. So most of us were newbies, but we met some individuals, mainly from the Army, because again, DLI is operated by the Army on behalf of the Department of, well, now War, but for all of the armed forces. So any Army personnel got first dibs if they came back for second languages. So there were some careerists who had maybe studied Russian some years ago, but again, in the night, the Cold War's over. We're friends with Russia. We don't need Russian linguists anymore. And the invasion, when Iraq invaded Kuwait, it really caught us unawares from a linguistic capabilities perspective. And so after the late 80s, early 90s, DLI ramped up all of the Arabic and then to a degree Hebrew training at DLI. And so at any given time, there are hundreds of soldiers, seamen, airmen, Marines, and then careerists studying Arabic. My company had 500 people in it at any given month and constantly coming in and going out. So again, I love languages. I'm a word nerd. And I thought, ooh, maybe I could come back sometime and learn another language. And they said, once you're in Arabic for life. Like, we need Arabic linguists so desperately, you get Arabic. I was in a reserve unit in Texas, and this was a really cool thing. We were a military intelligence auxiliary detachment. So we were just a detachment of linguists representing probably 24 different languages. And so whenever an Army unit was going to be deployed and they didn't have their own linguists embedded with them, they would tap our unit and say, hey, we need 3 Korean linguists. We're going to the DMZ, or hey, we're going to Saudi Arabia. We need some Arabic linguists. Can you come with us? So since I was put in Arabic for the first time, that would have been it. But in my reserve unit, this man, and brilliant linguist, he probably was fluent in 6 or 7 different languages. And so he was a full-time reservist because he would pick and choose where he would travel around the world all of the time. And he was proficient in, half a dozen not half a dozen, because I only said 6 or 7 languages and I'm exaggerating now, but fluent in Eastern European languages and Russian and Arabic and I think French. And so whenever a unit needed any kind of linguist, he would take that call and go with them. But I did not have the opportunity to go back. So
Sort of the reason I ask is when I got OCS in 68, and I was headed to flight school in Vietnam based on that big battery of tests. My first was flight, my second was language. His first was language, second was flight. So he went to Monterey.
Okay.
And he started out in Vietnamese, and today, if I'm not mistaken, he's not in the military anymore, but he never wore a uniform after that first time in language school.
Oh.
He's up to 7 or 8 languages, and it was really funny. I met him in New York. We were at one of the hotels, a whole bunch of Japanese in there. We're getting on the elevator and they're talking, and
Yeah.
he hits me in the shoulder, said, Justin, when we walk out, turn around, I want you to bow with me, and I'm gonna say something to these people. And so we turned around, and basically what he said is, you ought to watch what you're saying when you go
Yes.
around people who you don't know who speak your language. Well, he went on. That was his last day at the Hilton. I was there 5 more days. Every time I ran into these Japanese, they would bow.
Yeah. Yes. Oh.
But Dan, I think he was up to 9 or 10 languages. He goes back now as a civilian. I mean, he's 80 years old like I am, and I don't know what his security clearance is. I also know he learned Russian.
Oh,
And
yes.
probably around 91 or 92, when I saw him, he had a gorgeous picture of his Russian girlfriend, and one of his friends who had also been with him from time to time said he was gone from us for 18 months one time. We really believe he infiltrated the KGB. So I would have loved to go to language school, but I just thought I'd interject that because the second question would be then if someone was learning another language, if they knew Arabic, were they being taught Russian or Vietnamese in Arabic, from Arabic to the next language?
Okay, could you re-ask that question? I'm not sure what.
Yeah, let's see. Justin, can you unmute again?
If someone's coming back, and let's say they've got 2 languages behind them, and they're coming to learn a third, would they teach that language to them from English to the language, or they teach it from their last language to the language?
No. So that's actually an interesting question. And boy, wouldn't that be fun for the instructor, right? Because that would assume the instructor teaching the course is, proficient in Arabic and also Russian and can, cross-pollinate, go between the 2 languages. So they would start fresh, clean slate in that new language school, learning the Vietnamese or learning the Korean as if they'd never had any of the other languages before. But I see, like, it makes fiscal and economical sense, right, to send individuals who have performed well at DLI to go back for different languages because the cost to train linguists is exorbitant. And so if you've got a sure thing with somebody like your friend, sir, keep sending them back because you never know. I mean, the US government does all sorts of interesting things all over the world. And I can imagine what he must have been doing for 18 months when no one heard from him, being fluent in 9 different languages. But when you've really identified a true polyglot who is that talented, I think my brain would probably explode. I don't think I'm quite that gifted, but there are those rare individuals who can keep going back and, they continue to serve other missions that require that proficiency.
Bethany, where did the Army then send you after you graduated from DLI?
Ooh, I had the distinct pleasure of going to Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas. So basically the geographical opposite of Monterey, California. Maybe they send people there who are Arabic linguists to prepare them for Middle Eastern heat. So we were there and when I say we, there was a group of us. In fact, some of us had been in basic training together, DLI together in Arabic, and then we were sent to Goodfellow Air Force Base for classified training. So like DLI is an Army installation and hosts all of the services, Goodfellow Air Force Base is a place to go for your intelligence training if you're not going to be an interrogator. Those lucky chaps got to go to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. So we're at Goodfellow Air Force Base from March to July. I've never witnessed boot polish or kiwi polish melting in the afternoon sun during afternoon formation. The drill sergeants love that because, of course, you do more push-ups as the uglier your boots become. But the longer we stood in the heat, it just kept dripping off. So it was Goodfellow Air Force Base for March to July.
For March to July.
Yes,
And
it was hot.
and then where?
And then, sadly, I was never stationed overseas and never got to test my language prowess in the real world, so to speak. So I was sent to work with military intelligence. We were a strategic unit, which meant we would never deploy. But we were basically, if you know what's at Fort Meade, so the big black building there owned by that other three-letter agency, a lot of military linguists sit in that building. So we were Fort Meade Light at the GRSOC. So Fort Gordon, Georgia, and Augusta, Georgia. I feel like I've been in two really popular golfing destinations between Pebble Beach and Monterey. And then, you know, oh gosh, what it just eluded me, the name of the Masters in Georgia, in Augusta, Georgia. So I was with my MI unit in Augusta, Georgia for 2 years, working in a skiff. The windows only faced inside to the courtyard. We had no exterior windows. But I was a foreign voice. What did we call it? It has a big fancy unclassified name that looked really impressive on my resume for my first job. Foreign voice interception, or no, foreign voice transmission interceptor. So basically, you know, we're working a military intelligence mission. Because a lot of people say, oh, you're tapping phone calls. And it's like, okay, let's not, you know, overblow what you see on TV. But, you know, we had military targets because we were the military collecting military intelligence. And it's in the 1990s before 9/11. And so sat in a skiff, wore headphones, worked round the clock, you know, learned how to work a graveyard shift and then switched 2 days later for the day shift. So that was really fun for, you know, circadian cycles and whatnot. But yeah, did foreign voice interception. And it was pretty fun because I have never been so good at typing before in my life. I love how the military equips you for so many other things in addition to your primary job. You know, I did some keyboarding in high school, but I was still pretty wed to my pen and paper because not everybody had computers at home at that point. And we had to learn to type at AIT because we're doing, you know, if you're doing live interception, we're typing everything we're hearing. And sometimes you don't have enough time to actually translate it. And so everything is being recorded and typed at the same time. And then we go back and check our, you know, we'll translate. Here's another fun thing that is mind bending. So, you know, Arabic is a completely different script than our alphabet, right? So we have Romanized letters. They're in the script is in the text box. It's very squiggly and very beautiful. Now, those letters don't match one for one with our letters in the Arabic, or I'm sorry, in the English language. And so what the military did, and I love this about how the military just simplifies things and makes it possible to do very difficult jobs in very stressful situations. Like anybody who's handled a Claymore mine, this way to enemy, like there's no mistaking which way it points, right? And so for linguists who learn Arabic, they developed what they call, I think it was called SATs. And I don't remember what the acronym was for, but they assigned a letter on the keyboard to a letter to the Arabic language, right? To the alphabet, the Arabic alphabet. So you could pick up a book and see all of these, and we all had to type in caps. So if you can imagine this, our keyboards are set to caps. We're typing in caps. If you looked at it, it would look like a bunch of gibberish because it's all English letters going from left to right. So we would read it out loud, and it was Arabic words that we were typing in English letters. And so they were, it was like coded Arabic, right? And so that to me was fantastic, but it standardizes everything. So if something happens, because we're providing real live, like real-time intelligence to the warfighter in another time zone, because I'm sitting in Georgia, we had to make sure that what I'm typing, and if another linguist verified it, there was no question like, oh, well, are you sure it's this word? It's like, go back and check it, right? And so that code, that SATs, standardized because there's certain letters in the Arabic alphabet, they all kind of sound alike if you're not really tuned to what it is. And sometimes we would have issues like, play that back. Like, I didn't hear that, right? So we all had our individual targets we were listening to, but we also worked as a unit because there could be room for error, right? If your ear, or God forbid you have the first sinus infection I ever had, I was working a graveyard shift and I had headphones on. I thought my face was going to explode from the pressure and I couldn't hear because my ears were so clogged. And so I'm typing and doing the best I can. And I've got my partner next to me and she's double checking my work. But that SATS code helped us standardize so we could type instead of like, well, it kind of sounds like this K sound, but we knew exactly. It's like, no, it's this one because you use the letter Q on the keyboard rather than the letter K.
Bethany, it sounds like the work was interesting to you and absorbing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I want to ask you, I'm trying to do the math in the time. I have a timeline in my head. You're probably at Augusta or Fort Meade in 1999, 2000, doing this work. Looking back after 9/11, did you ever think, oh boy, like that conversation I heard or that information I gathered indicated that something was coming? Or, I mean, did you ever?
How about I not answer that question?
Okay, got it.
Um,
That's interesting.
but I would just say, because I still like to protect the mission that I supported, but, I would say that oftentimes, and after leaving the military, having worked in the intelligence community for so long, we often become, especially when people have access to all sorts of information that the majority of the world has no idea that it's happening or things are going on. When you have that privileged access, we tend to get a little full of ourselves and our understanding of the world, and we think with absolute certainty something is going to happen or not happen. And I've worked with a lot of very intelligent and wise and experienced intelligence analysts and experts who've covered the whole world. And today when we have conversations, it's like, who knew the 1,000 Talents program out of the People's Republic of China would be as insidious as it was? We kind of get in our own little groove about something. And even when I was working counterterrorism projects at Los Alamos National Lab, I was 100% like in the Middle East, I'm doing this Middle East target and, translating some interesting things. But even then, I took a DLPT then after 9/11 and I basically flunked it because the terminology, the words were totally different. Like when I was a linguist, it was all on military target. We had to memorize what all of the international, airplanes and tanks and shit, like we had to be able to visualize, like identify it by sight and know all of the names. And when I took that DLPT, I'm listening to it, and the woman who recorded the test was my director at DLI, so that was fun. Like I recognized her voice. Like when you listen for a living, you get really good at remembering people's voices. And so here's Mrs. Al-Kitab, reading all of these questions about, all of, IED, and it's like, I didn't even know what an IED was when I was at DLI. Like it wasn't a thing. And we would talk about terrorism and it would be the Lockerbie event. It's like hijacking back in the day. And it's like, terrorism, no big deal. It's like, psh, we don't care about terror, because Saddam Hussein was a scourge like to the Middle East and we were worried about him. And so I would say, looking back, I've just learned the lesson of you really have to be willing to try something new. Like if I could be a Chinese linguist now, I'd be very, very efficient and even more effective in my role, like 1 million times more effective in my role than what I currently am. But that was not the plan for me. And so that's how I would answer that question.
How did the attacks of 9/11 change your life, change your service?
I was hoping it would have a change. It had zero change on my life. So I was even in a reserve unit based out of Santa Fe, and they were a water purification unit. And I thought for sure, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm an Arabic linguist. I'm, temporarily placed in this water purification unit. And I think there was an old Pauly Shore movie where he goes to the army and he's in a water purification unit and they get sent to the Middle East. And it's kind of irreverent, but we saw it anyway because you watch all the military movies when you're in the military. And so we're all joking. It's like, we're totally going to the Middle East. Didn't go. And then when I made my way to the auxiliary detachment, the weekend I submitted medical documentation requesting a medical discharge because I was pregnant with my son. They're like, well, we have orders for you. And my first sergeant just read them, he put them through the shredder because they were classified orders. So I don't even know where, my buddies went. So I never went anywhere. Rumor has it, it was, so at the time, if you go back to that picture, Todd, of that beautiful graduation photo, my dad at the time was actually serving in the US Congress representing the 3rd District of New Mexico. And so I was often handled with kid gloves when I would show up to my, report for duty, which was a little awkward being a lowly private. And so, rumor had it was that they couldn't send a congressman over to a war zone, but I don't have any actual what we call in the job rumor intelligence. So yeah, I can't prove that, but that could have played into it. So 9/11 had zero impact. I was very sad. I didn't go anywhere. But that is okay. And I'm thankful for the men and women who were there and were called to go. And I think it would have been, a very terrifying but wonderful adventure, but it was one that was not meant for me.
I love Renee's question here in the chat because I want to get to that too. And I think we'll have people wanting to ask you questions about what you
Of
do
course.
now. What do you do
Yes.
now?
What do I
And
do now?
you're a protective intelligence analyst, so you're still in
Yes.
the intelligence, counterintelligence, security field. And I'd love to hear about how your, Army background helped to train you for that, but then
Yeah.
also kind of like security threats. I mean,
Yes.
give us a little briefing on the kinds of problems and issues that you work with today.
Of course. So I always love talking about this story because when I reflect on how my life has unfolded, I'm just continually amazed. So growing up in Los Alamos, I thought I was going to leave and never come back because the one employer in town is Los Alamos National Laboratory. And if you don't have a master's and PhD in physics or engineering or chemistry or something, why in the world would you work there? And so I went home and started to go to school and got married and had a baby, and we bought a house, and my parents are thrilled, first grandchild. And it's like, well, I guess I'm staying here. And obviously, if you work at a nuclear weapons laboratory, it requires a lot of security. And, there are security clearances. Everybody in town has a security clearance. We're safeguarding a lot of sensitive things there. And so, word gets out. It's like, oh, Redmond came back from the military and she speaks Arabic and she's got a security clearance. And, I got an internship there translating. My chemistry teacher from high school thought it was hilarious because I flunked chemistry the first year I took it. Like, I'm good at translation and, conjugating verbs, but chemical equations, please do not ask me, like under pain of death, please do not ask me. There's a piece of my brain missing and it does chemical equations for chemistry. So I actually had to translate spreadsheets of technical terms for chemical precursors of, narcotics and homemade explosives because the laboratory, because of its unique role in national security and all of the scientists and engineers, like that brain trust, they help prepare members of the military community and the intelligence community to go to scary places. People in EOD and who do really scary things, they're learning from the best bomb technicians of the world because they're coming out of the nuclear weapons program, right? And so it's our scientists and engineers who are, we got to fire off projectiles out in the middle of the desert. I mean, it was so much fun, but I'm the one translating all the chemistry terms from English into Arabic to give the folks going overseas, like if you're out gathering intel, like if, teaching them pattern recognition, be able to like, this is a newspaper and this is a recipe for a homemade bomb, right? Like giving them that linguistic support. And the roles continually progressed into physical security roles and writing, security policies, and how do we better protect our classified information, and how do we better vet our employees coming in and our international researchers coming in, and made my way into the weapons directorate, protecting their secret networks and doing cybersecurity. Now, I'm not technical. Again, all policy and administration, really good at writing and communicating, which again, thank you, Uncle Sam and my parents for teaching me how to write, like an educated person. And the Army has the, very strict writing style. And so it served me well in all of those jobs. And then a buddy of mine asked, would you ever come back, to the FEE, which is a field intelligence element? It's like, what would I do? Because I tried the whole intelligence analyst thing. I'm not good at, understanding foreign weapons systems. Like, I'm not a nuclear engineer. Like, it's hard to be an intelligence analyst, the more technical the information gets. And he's like, no, it's a role in the counterintelligence office. Like, oh, now you have my attention. And so it was the perfect blend of everything I'd studied and learned in DLI, just learning languages and learning different cultures and people and understanding people, and studying political science in the university and understanding the security that we do at Los Alamos and why we do it. And probably, except for now, like the most favorite job I ever had. I loved my counterintelligence job at Los Alamos. And, I think one of the most exciting things I did, challenging and fun, because I was asked to provide unclassified counterintelligence briefings to a bunch of people who didn't have clearances. And all the sexy good stuff is in the classified information, right? But it's like, these are incoming employees. We've got to protect them. We've got to start prepping them for what's next as we phase them into being clearance holders. And so I tapped back into that Manhattan era mentality, right? It's like, we were the secret town, we were the secret laboratory. What did General Ashley Groves do to implement counterintelligence measures to protect the atomic bomb? Well, he was really good at protecting it from falling into Nazi hands. And where the program failed, and I don't think it was because we believe that people we bring in behind the fence, we're all here for the same reason. And yet, I think it was at Greenglass and the Rosenbergs and Klaus Fuchs. Sometimes not everybody in the room is aligned with you on what is the priority of the day and what are we here to protect. And so just that issue of how are we doing counterintelligence from the guys out there and gals like me who are collecting against you? How do we protect ourselves from that? But how are we protecting ourselves from the people that we're giving authorized access to? And I loved doing that and finding the balance of, well, we really need to bring this person in and they come from the sensitive country, but they're the one person who can do, like, how do we put in the appropriate guardrails to let the science happen? I mean, because I'm sure you're very aware of the Manhattan Project and all saw Oppenheimer or read, what is it? Is it Prometheus Bound, or like all of the great literature and history books we have on that time? We needed the best and brightest from all over the world. And we were rescuing scientists out of Nazi Germany and bringing people in from England and recruiting people out of the universities. And so how do we protect what it is we're developing while allowing the science and technology development to still without stifling that innovation? And so that's where I found my sweet spot. It's like, I'm no scientist, as Mr. Powell can attest to my dismal chemistry grades, certainly not an engineer. It's like, oh my gosh, please don't ask me to design or build anything. The most chemistry I do is I bake really good cookies, but that is it, but it's very, I stick to my recipe. I don't experiment. And so how do we balance allowing innovation and encouraging innovation, right? Because if we look at what's happening with the People's Republic of China now, and this is a lot of what I've been doing for the last 10 years of my career, is looking at their national objectives and how it hinges on their supremacy as a military power, but that can only happen through economic dominance and scientific and technological dominance. Well, who's been the leading nation in those areas? Oh, that's us, right? And it's interesting to listen to the conversations that, happen in open symposia or, a forum that will be hosted in China, and they're still struggling with this question, like how do we encourage innovation? But there's something different about their cultural mindset. We look back with our very Western eyes, it's like, of course we invented these things. But I think it's because we've always been privileged to be a part of this history of Western civilization where so much invention and innovation has come, out of Europe, out of the United States. But a lot of that Confucius mentality and philosophy, but then later got warped by the Chinese Communist Party. They're wrestling with what is innovation?
Yeah.
Well, how are we going to compete? Well, you know what? We can steal it. And what I also love, equally challenging, is persuading people here in the United States that yes, there are people here who want to steal it and they're smart enough to develop it. But if they can develop it on the same track as they're stealing it, that suits their purposes just fine. And I think a lot of times Americans, because we want to trust and believe in the best of people, they can't imagine a government that's forcing their people to do unethical, unlawful, immoral things, right? And so that's what I do. I did counterintelligence for Los Alamos National Lab and the Department of Energy. Obviously the biggest thing to protect, was our nuclear weapons program and the stockpile stewardship program. And then after my son graduated from high school, I was ready for a change, and I needed to try something else and stretch my wings a little bit. And so I'm in California. I work for one of the country's largest utility companies. I'm with Pacific Gas and Electric. And I never realized how technical running a utility company is. And every time I turn on a light switch, all of the innovation and manpower that goes behind that, and just the history of that innovation and that technology and the scientific and mathematical talent that culminated into the point of me flipping my switch or charging my iPhone and my other iPhone. And so, with things now with artificial intelligence, and you probably saw in the news, these big companies, they want to bring back 3 Mile Island. Like, we're going to fire up the nuclear reactors because we cannot generate enough power for the energy demands we have today. So, what? Where's that collection going to be happening from adversarial nation states? Well, it's going to be happening, in the utility sector, in the energy sector. And so that's what I do. I protect my company. And I do love the term protective intelligence. It is a little bit of a euphemism for counterintelligence, but we're corporate America. We're not the military and we're not the government. We can't be hardcore. And, I can't give a defensive briefing. I give a protective briefing. But even that has opened up doors to have conversations with people where they actually feel safe to receive that message, because a lot of people get scared when I tell them, hey, the reason you're being targeted and you're receiving these emails is because you have and know something that somebody else wants. And they have no problem breaking the law to get to it, right? And so,
Bethany,
I'm a protective intelligence analyst.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a second, and we want to come back to it. We're going to take what we call here a station break and let people know this is the Veterans Breakfast Club. And I want to encourage people to ask Bethany questions. She works for PG. You call it PG&E, right? PG&E?
Yes, Pacific
PG&E.
Gas and Electric. Yeah.
Pacific Gas and Electric. You're in protective intelligence analyst in the private sector. And we want to talk about that and threats to national security, corporate security. But we also want to let people know that we do this every Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern, every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be back Thursday night with the history of the Holocaust. We'll have guest Glenn Flickinger will be hosting this program with guest Doug Servey, who's the executive director of the New Jersey Commission on Holocaust Education. He's going to give us a broad kind of history of the Holocaust and then dive deep into what Holocaust education is like today. So in schools, at least in New Jersey. So join us for that. That'll be Thursday night at 7 p.m. And then a week from tonight, we're having open conversation. And I look forward to this. No subject, no special guest. We're going to be just talking. So come with your stories, with your questions, with your topics that you want to share. I certainly will have plenty. I'm sure that is Monday, March 16th. And I also want to mention, we've been talking about this special event that we did last week in more than last week, 10 days ago in Santa Monica, and it was called Story Fest. And I just thought I would share a few pictures. We did a 3-day veteran storytelling event, and man, was it magical. It was at the Unlikely Collaborators Foundation's event space. And one of the highlights was having Laylee Hayslip, this wonderful woman here, give us a talk about her life. She grew up outside of Da Nang in a village. She fought as a Viet Cong. She fought on the American side. She came to the United States in 1970 after marrying a GI, and has since built one of the largest foundations that does work in Asia, humanitarian work, and that's the East Meets West Foundation and also Global Village. She was a delight. She agreed to wear a Veterans Breakfast Club baseball hat, which I never thought she would do because she has such wonderful hair, but here she is. And this was the whole space. The idea was we had about 80 people there. About 40 of them were Veterans Breakfast Club people that I knew and from Pittsburgh that have come to our live streams. And then we had about 40 people locally visit us and be at the event. One of whom was Joe Peterbers, 101 years old, P-51 pilot who served in World War II, the Korean War, and Vietnam. There he was signing books, and he also spoke. I think Susie Gilliland is on the call tonight, and I'm just putting this out because this is one of my favorite pictures. Two wonderful people, Susie Gilliland here on the left and Ron Hathaway here on the right. And that was kind of the magic of this event is, we have so many people who have not met in person because we meet here on Zoom, but here they are. They got to meet each other. And it was just it's a wonderful picture. It's one of my favorite pictures. We did a breakfast on the USS Iowa, which is a museum ship, battleship. We had a breakfast there. We had some veterans who served on the Iowa talking. And we also had this great retired commander, Coast Guard Commander Mark Nguyen, who escaped Vietnam on April 29th, 1975. And he told his harrowing story of escape and how it inspired him to get into life-saving with the Coast Guard. It was absolutely spellbound. He was so wonderful that I asked him to come on. We're going to be scheduling him to come on our Zoom sometime. Carl Merlante's here on the left, great novelist of the Vietnam War, Marine, fellow Marine on the right, Elliot Ackerman. He's been on our program, Intelligence, CIA, Afghanistan and Iraq. We had them in dialogue talking about their service and their wars and what it's like to come home from war. Just giving you an overview, Cody Leroy Wilson closed out our event with a one-man play essentially it's about growing up Vietnamese American in West Virginia and not really knowing his Vietnamese family at all and being very curious about it. And it was an imaginative kind of walk through his family history on both sides. His American grandfather, very much a combat veteran of the Vietnam War. So we have all this wonderful footage from the sessions that we had, the stories that were shared, and we're going to be sharing some of that video with everyone and having conversations around it. So just keep in mind that we'll be doing the programming around there. Let's get back to Bethany. And I want to invite people to who have questions for Bethany to ask them. I know I have a question, Bethany, and that is, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you. The dog went a little wild, so I muted myself.
Yes, we love wild dogs here. And and the thing is, noise suppression on Zoom is so effective. It's amazing that we rarely ever hear barking dogs or noise in the background.
Okay, good.
Gil Ferry, how are you, Gil?
I'm doing great. Bethany, amazing presentation.
Thank you, sir.
I'm two of your employer's customers.
Oh.
I live in Bethany. So the pig, goat, and elephant company rises again.
Yes. I know. Please don't have it again.
I've been studying something, not researching it, but trying to stay in touch. with something that's going on in China that was brought to my attention by a former Air Force intelligence officer, Roger Dong, who was not covert, he was overt for his entire 33 years, retired as lieutenant colonel. And that is the fact that China has a couple of really, really, really major problems right now. If you want to add the inability to pump any oil from its own land, that's a third. But one is the fact that many of the largest cities, I think there are 20 of them, including Beijing and Shanghai, were built over aquifers. And those cities, which now have multiple high-rise buildings, which are extremely heavy, are sinking. And there's nothing the Chinese can do about it. As the aquifers get pumped out, the heavy buildings sink. The streets don't, but all of a sudden the sewer, water, electricity, electrical connections for internet, whatever, the tenants in the high rise don't have any of that anymore. And it potentially can cause, with a few million people that are displaced after they purchased or at least were occupying an apartment, could cause a revolt.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if, not you personally, would intelligence specialists, especially those who have a special language skill, be involved in trying to monitor what's going on with the contractor who's being called out or the engineer to try to solve the problem, so that we stay ahead of the game in knowledge? Is that something that the defense language specialists from down in Monterey would be involved in, or is that something you'd rather not even talk about? It's not a military situation.
Right.
It certainly impacts upon the inability of the military to do anything in taking over Taiwan, because their grandparents and their kids are falling out of windows from buildings that are collapsing.
Right. I'm sorry, my AirPods died right as you were putting the final point on your question. Will you ask one more time?
Yeah, would a defense language institute student such as yourself, whether in the military or not, be involved in SIGINT, signal intelligence, where you are trying to monitor telephone calls or radio intercepts or whatever amongst the owners of the property, if it's not the government, the Chinese Communist Party, individuals trying to solve the problem, and the contractors who go out and meet with the tenants of the city, relocate them, and then try to do what they can to save the building rather than have it just sink into the abyss, because this is a major problem.
Right. So while I can't answer that question with any authority, because I'm no longer in the intelligence community, and if I was, I wouldn't be able to answer it anyway, because it would likely involve some classified information. I would say in general, when we think about what kind of information our government is interested in from an intelligence perspective, right? Like, why does a country have an intelligence gathering program to begin with, right? You know, and I always like to start with military intelligence. We were all trained. It's like, what's the sit rep, right? You call out, like, we count the trucks in the parking lot, we count the tanks, we count, you know, how many men are out in formation, and you're constantly collecting those statistics on the enemy. And so, you know, our nation, our national security is very dependent on all sorts of intelligence. I think the Russians have excelled at this for a very long time. We read those great Russian spy novels, and, you know, they describe the man sitting in the bar and he's just watching people and he's picking up garbage, right? And that's not, you know, super cool signals intelligence, but it's any kind of information that's going to help us make a better decision in the future, to get better clarity on what's happening. And so I think China is facing a lot of problems, because if you look at the history of, you know, of the government, of the Chinese Communist Party, their insistence on how they protect their own regime and the programs they implement for that kind of self-protection have been very detrimental to their own people. They've been responsible for more deaths of their own people than any other nation, right? So any kind of tally we could have during World War II or after that, the Chinese Communist Party has been responsible for more deaths of their own citizens than anybody else. And they're born of these silly things. One crazy example, and it kind of reminds me of buildings being built on top of aquifers. So there, at one point, Mao implemented a certain program where they wanted to protect the rice growers in certain provinces. So he implemented a tax where the farmers had to, so the sparrows, the little birds in the field, it reminds me of the passages in Matthew when Jesus is like, you're more valuable than the sparrows, where all of the sparrows who are being fed by the hand of God in these rice fields, they're wiping out the rice paddies. And so to be able to protect their crops, Mao says, we're going to tax you on your sparrows and you need to start collecting. We're going to have a quota on how many sparrows you can bring in because we need to get rid of the sparrows so we can protect the rice and we're not losing our crops. Well, what happens when you remove something from the food chain? Those locusts, 2 steps down from those sparrows, wiped out the rice paddies. And it got ridiculous. So not only did you wipe out an already decimated crop because you got rid of the sparrows, the tax of sparrows was enforced in all places around China. So people, even in urban developed areas, had to bring in sparrows. So then it creates this black market of sparrow buying, right? And I need my sparrows and I've got to go do this because that was the requirement to protect what Mao was saying. And so in my mind, like that mentality of, here's this problem and we're going to solve it through this solution that does not seem reasonable or rational, in my mind, that it equates to we're going to deny the reality of the topology in this area and build on these aquifers. And, previously when I mentioned their goal to be, #1 on the planet, well, that means you have to mine the heck out of your natural resources, right? And if you're willing to do that, to decimate your land for those natural resources, you're going to destroy that geography and that geology. And so I am sure there are people, far smarter and more trained in these matters, and the problems within China. I'm also hoping people within their own country are paying attention to this because, I have a high regard for our government, but we also know from what the founding fathers did, we can't always trust the government. And I'm hoping that there are some good people in the People's Republic of China who are going to wake up one day and it's like, we can't trust this regime anymore. And so I'm sure there's somebody out there monitoring that. And hopefully the right thing is done to save and protect those people, because a lot of shortcuts have been made to really speed up the urbanization of certain areas in China, and it always wrecks the population. Not only is it bad for the environment, but it's never good for the people who are living there, all of the displaced people, because of these insane government programs that exist over there.
Yeah, and insane was the anti-sparrow campaign. I think it caused a famine. And
Yes.
it was very short,
Yes.
but it was enough. I mean, wiped out so many sparrows,
Yes.
it caused a famine.
Yes.
1960 or so. Chris Perolo.
Bethany, thanks for being here. You're putting on a wonderful, wonderful presentation for us.
Oh,
We're
thanks,
learning
Eric.
a lot. I was formerly in the Naval Security Group, so I can identify with what you're talking about. Also met quite a few linguists when I was on active duty. You said something earlier which motivated my question here. Everything you know about intelligence gathering and the whole world of it and how it works and this and that. Have you ever saw something in the news or something that higher up there, and you said to yourself, based on everything I know, that doesn't ring true? That I just don't buy that. Where are they going with this? What? And then all of a sudden stop yourself and say, okay, all right, but they must know something they can't tell us. So I'm just going to back away and take it for what it is. Have you ever had that experience?
My whole life, ever since joining the Army. Yeah, there were times I would get off of shift, working a graveyard shift. And why do linguists in Georgia work a graveyard shift? Well, because their targets are awake during that time of day, right? Opposite sides of the planet. And coming home and turning on the news. And the worst thing to do for yourself to get any kind of rest is turn on the news before you go to bed. So I highly recommend you don't do that. Get a good book instead. And I just remember sometimes, and I think especially during that time, I always heard stories. So I'm going to take the circuitous path in answering your question, sir. Since my mom and her sister grew up on Okinawa, they were there during the Vietnam War, and they were my mom was a candy striper at one of the military hospitals there, and she dated the younger GIs, and she always told me all of these stories, but they were always raised with like the utmost respect for the military. So when they came back stateside for R&R and they land at San Francisco International Airport in the 60s, it's like, what the heck is going on in this country, right? And just the anti-military protests and that was her firsthand experience. And, I wasn't there obviously during that time, but I just remember we go in waves in this country of how we regard our military and what it is they're doing overseas and whether we're going to back them and welcome them home or whatever. And I would like to say it changed a lot after 9/11. That moment, that day was very unifying. But I've always felt like whenever I see something on the media, it's kind of like, could you just stick the knife in a little further into the gut of the military men and women of this nation and twist one word? Like, I always just feel like there's a little bit of a, oh, thank you for your service. And then of the other side of their mouth, it's like this little, jab. And so the news outlets, they're there to turn a profit, whether or not what they're reporting on is factual. And there have been a lot of times I've seen things and it's like, well, that's absolutely not true. But, I can't say that out loud because I can't divulge how I know that information, right? But I've seen enough and I've learned enough through those protected means that none of us, even with the clearance and the access, none of us knows the whole picture. And I really wish our news reporters would hold themselves to a higher level of integrity when they're reporting out the news, because it makes a difference, right? Or when people, my son asked me the other day, did you hear about that ex-CIA agent? He served jail time because he gave up some names, but he's a whistleblower. And I said, that's kind of the beauty of our country, that we have these guarded programs to protect our people, but then there's still the freedom to be a whistleblower. And what is that line? Because obviously we don't want government abuses, right? But we also don't want people willy-nilly posting names and publishing names of covert operatives, because that puts people's lives at risk. And so I'm often disappointed in the news media. I really don't look at the news a whole lot. Because I just don't trust them, and I like to come to my own conclusions. And especially now when you do a Google search, you get that automatically generated AI response instead of, it's like, take me to the news source, because I've been trying to be an analyst and use critical thinking skills. And so I don't want the story told to me. I want the information so I can suss the story out and put the facts together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bethany. Thank you, Chris. Bethany, this is such an interesting conversation. I appreciate you spending time with us here. Oh, Gil is one more. Gil, you're going to have the last word, which means you'll have to unmute.
You mentioned rice. Most of us watching today are veterans, certainly not all. And we're very well aware of Agent Orange if you served in Vietnam.
Yeah.
But I found no veterans that are aware that we also used Agent Blue and Agent White. Ooh. And you know what it was used for? To defoliate rice, to deny food for the enemy. And at the same time, USAID shipped bags of rice, millions of pounds of rice from up in the Sacramento Delta area with the clasping hands on the burlap sack or whatever over to the South Vietnamese to keep them alive, because they could not work their rice paddies, generally speaking, during the war.
Yeah.
I'd really like to get together. Are you in San Francisco?
I'm very close. I'm in Half Moon Bay. And where are you, sir? I didn't hear which town you're in.
In Berkeley, but our son lives in Montera. So,
oh, I go to Montera. So I was there this morning. I collect sea glass every Monday morning on Montera.
well, I got some very interesting things I'd like to share with you. Have you ever heard of the book "Don't Shoot the Ice Cream Man"?
No, but it sounds very interesting.
Good title.
Unbelievable. We had quite a bit to do with Chernobyl.
Thank you, Gil. Oh, I'm sorry. I had to mute him just because we're running out of time here. Half Moon Bay, Jack London territory. Love it. Bethany, thank you so much. Thank you, Gil. Thanks to all of you. Thank you, Tammy, for referring Bethany to us. I appreciate you all coming out tonight and spending this time with us in this interesting conversation. I hope you'll join us Thursday night at 7 p.m. and then, of course, a week from tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, Beth Russell, for being the live stream engineer. And Bethany, please do stay in touch, and I hope you'll join us again.
And please feel free to share my contact information with anybody on this call, my email. So
okay.
I would love to hear from people.
All right. Thank you very much. Good night, everyone.
Great. Good night. Thank you.